Hey everybody, got a new update here on the Echo Designer tool of the Super Mini Pack workstation. I added two big features recently that you might find interesting. The first feature is that now as you move zero values around, the tool updates in real time. So previously when you would move these zeros around, it would only take effect once you let go of the new zero position. Now as you move the zeros around, it updates in real time to show you what the different graphs will look like. So this gives you a better idea about where you want to place the zeros before you let go. So I think this is like a really good improvement if you're interactively editing the fur filter with the zeros. The second feature that I added, and I'm really excited about this one, is I added this feedback-based bandpass filter. The idea is instead of using all of these fur taps to implement the low-pass filter, just using the feedback path to kind of getting a similar effect. So I'll show that here. You can see that as I move this center frequency around in the feedback based filter, I'm getting a single peak in the magnitude response. And so this is how that sounds. So the effect isn't super strong. There is basically a max difference of about, if the peak is at 0 decibels, the lowest point is at negative 6.8. So you get about a difference of negative 5 to negative 7 decibels between the peak and the lowest point in the magnitude response. The reason the difference is so small is because we're only working with two poles here compared to when we're using the bandpass filter or the normal bandpass filter. We have about many zeros, and these zeros are placed like right on the frequency spectrum, so they can have a very drastic, strong response, magnitude response. See here at the 0 point, it's roughly negative 51 decibels compared to the peak, which is negative 2 decibels. That's a lot stronger response. But when we have just a single pole, the response can only be so strong. And even here at about 8,000 hertz, which is the center of the spectrum, we have about, the peak is at 0 decibels and the bottommost point is negative 10 decibels. So that is probably the strongest you can expect the difference to be between the peak and the lowest point in the magnitude response. To deal with that issue, I've also added this resonance setting. So the resonance, when you set it to 0, wherever the peak is in the feedback-based bandpass filter, that peak is always going to be at more or less a response of 0 decibels. And that's good because as you move the center frequency, you don't really want to be amplifying anything more than it is coming into the filter. If it were higher, then you'd be having random amplification or gain. Then you would have to deal with that in your production, in your composition. But when the peak is at 0 decibels, that basically there's no change at that peak in terms of gain. So that's good. It allows you to freely move the center frequency. The resonance, however, will increase the gain at the peak. So I'm going to set the resonance all the way to 127, and you can see that this peak is now at a gain of like 13 decibels. And as I move the center frequency around, the peak sort of changes shape. But even at the max, kind of like the max amplification, this peak is now at 40 decibels compared to the lowest point, which is at negative 6. So that's roughly 46, 48 decibel difference between the peak and the lowest point. The shape of the magnitude response is a lot narrower, and that's sometimes what you want in a bandpass filter. But the problem is that now the peak is at a non-zero decibel amplification. So, depending on what signals you're putting into the filter, you might get clipping or something like that, some sort of distortion, depending on the signal that you're putting in or the sound that you're putting in. So when you're using resonance, you have to be a lot more careful about what you're putting in. So let me now show you what it sounds like when the resonance is set to 127. And you can see you get like this whistling sound at the middle point of the, when the center frequency is set to the middle point of the spectrum. And that's just because the filter, the pole is at like its closest point to the, to the unit circle at the center spectrum. Now you might ask, why can't you get the poles to be at the close to the unit circle for every center frequency? Right, so when I set the center frequency to 4,000 hertz, about 4,000 hertz, the pole is over here. It's not like right up to the unit circle as it is when the center frequency is set to 8,000 hertz. And the reason is because the way that the Echo hardware is structured and the feedback path is structured, I don't have 100% control of where the poles are going to be. I sort of have to wrestle with these zeros that are here as well. And so whenever you add a pole, you're going to be necessarily adding zeros, and that just limits your control over where the poles are going to be. There's no easy way to fully control where the poles are going to be. So for instance, I can't even have my pole like over here. In a two-pole system, there's no way I can have the pole over here. The SNES just won't allow for that. Now what I can do is that if you set the sixth FIR value to max, to the max value 127, and you set the feedback to the max negative value, which is negative 128, if you move the first 7 around, you can see how the pole basically hugs the top edge of the unit circle. And so if you look here, that gives you like you get that same strong peaking across the frequency spectrum, but I can't go all the way. I can't go all the way to 0 hertz, and I can't go all the way to 1600 hertz or 16,000 hertz. There's only a very, very narrow range. But, and so the bandpass filter doesn't generate these types of poles, but if you'd like to, you can do that manually by setting the echo feedback to negative 128, the first 6 to 127, and then just modulating first 7. And then you get that sort of sweeping at the top end of the frequency spectrum. And so let me show you how that sounds. There's sort of you're getting some sort of distortion. So let me reduce this to about 120. We'll do 120, I guess. So you can get that strong whistling across a greater range of center frequencies if you want to, if that's the effect you're looking for. I'm just, just putting that out there for you, so for you guys. But generally, the bandpass filter generator, the feedback-based bandpass filter generator, won't generate those strong peaks except near the center frequency. And when you set the resonance to 0, it's always going to generate a 0 decibel peak. And so that's how it's more intended to use, but you can mess with the resonance if you want in certain cases. So yeah, that's the video. Those are the 2 new features I added. I think they're pretty useful and they're kind of fun. They were fun to build, and also it's neat that you can do sort of these feedback-based bandpass filter effects too on the SNES. I have one more feature in mind that I'm thinking for this tool, and I'll talk about it in a future video. So if you're interested, please subscribe, please like the video, please comment, and all of that. And I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.